Hello, dear listeners, this is Ivona Remundová welcoming you once again from the microphone. You're tuning into the True Story podcast powered by Institute of Documentary Film in Prague. As we record this episode during the eStock Platform 2024, I'm honored to introduce our esteemed guests for today's discussion, the experienced filmmakers and docuseries authors, Justin Webster.
Hello, glad to be here.
And Stefano Strocchi.
Hello, everyone.
We seem to be in the midst of a huge boom of docuseries, but when did it actually start from your perspective? Is there a major figure or medium that invented the documentary series? Justin?
Hello. Yes, what a question. Docuseries and even the word documentary and non-fiction, I think there's an interesting backstory to this. In fact, it goes back to when Xavier Lestrade won the Oscar for Murder on a Sunday Morning in 2005, he had the chance then, the backing, to make a docu-series, or I don't really like the word documentary series. Docu-series often meant something else in the 1990s, something more mixing fiction and documentary. Anyway, so he made The Staircase in, I think, 2006, and it's interesting because 10 years later, more or less, in 2015, Making a Murderer came out on Netflix and was an unexpected global hit. And it took them 10 years to make it, the two directors, and they were obviously inspired by The Staircase. And Netflix, I think, weren't planning anything. They were finding that putting certain types of documentaries on their platforms, they were getting a big hit for not very much money. So this all comes from, that's where the series came from. But the Xavier Lestrade and other authors like Alex Gibney, Andrew Jarecki, who did The Jinx in 2014, just before the Making a Murderer came out. It's all about, we can talk about this a bit, it's all about narrative documentaries. Documentaries learned to tell stories through characters, just like you do in fiction, although the production behind it is completely different. But you feel like it's a character-driven story. And that's really the heart of the boom in documentaries and documentary series on the platforms, because that type of documentary can have a big audience.
It has a big audience. Is it surprising for you how popular it is these days, Stefano?
It's not surprising because the more the audience on the platforms is empowered with, let's say, choosing instead of following a programming that is pre-ordered by the broadcaster, the more, in a way, the audience chooses what they like. And of course, the idea with a series, independently if it's documentary or fiction, is that if you like the way the story is told, you like the protagonist, you can continue to see and to watch and to follow for months or the concept of series has always been connected to fidelization of the audience. One could also say that today with, as a more fragmented society, a series keeps you more company than a one-off, it's a little bit sad maybe to say, but it's definitely one of the elements. The other elements, I think, especially in documentary series, is that the work on dramaturgy to make the series really entertaining, emotional, close to protagonists has really got like a very, very big bump up in the last 15, 20 years. It's, The Staircase that he just mentioned, it's one of the first one that you watch. And this, I think it was Canal Plus that produced
Canal
it, right?
Plus and the BBC,
Canal
yeah,
Plus
that's
and
right.
the BBC. And it's, of course, it started, The Staircase is a so, let's say, something in between a true crime and a courtroom drama documentary. And it's unbelievable. I remember when I saw it the first time, and it was before The Jinx. And I thought, I want to do one too. Because the mix of being close to the protagonist like in a regular creative documentary, but using the dramaturgy that you would see in, let's say, True Detective or some other really good TV shows, fiction TV shows, that kind of mix of documentary with really, really good dramaturgy. And then later, when the platforms came with more money, then it was the good dramaturgy, which means that you kind of really borrow the dramaturgy of the fiction and you put it in the story that is a documentary with the access and the closeness to the protagonist that you have in a regular documentary, plus the high on-screen value of really beautiful cinematography. That was like, I think, the plus that came with the platforms, that really it bumped up also the quality of everything in terms of visuals. And it also pushed a little bit the experiments. How much can you push with the audience? How much information you reveal when, to continue to make it entertaining and meaningful.
Brilliant, Stefano. Really good. Yeah, there's so much to talk about here, because I think there's also, let's think about this true crime thing. I think it can be easily misunderstood, because what's happened is that a lot of the first documentary series had those themes, that subject matter. But really, it's much more to do with a style of storytelling, which is, as you say, when it's storytelling, where you don't tell everything all at once. It's not an essay; it's a story. And so, the way of telling a story is you don't tell everything at once. You tell the story, and that means that, in fact, the same way of telling the story used with another subject, like, for instance, Wild Wild Country was one of the first of these kind of documentary series, which was a big hit. And it's the same kind of storytelling, but there's no murder. But people still think that it's true, call it true crime, because it's that kind of thing. And in fact, if it's a series or if it's a documentary, if it's got that style of storytelling, it doesn't really matter. So the series itself aren't really a separate genre. What they are, what's happened though, I'll end here and Stefano can take over, is that there's a flood of these kind of not necessarily very meaningful or well-made documentaries of just true crime, just a kind of sensationalist kind of subject matter. And that's kind of blurred the picture a little bit.
Yeah, I totally agree. I want to add on this that really, when we talk true crime, there is a whole part of TV true crime that is produced in many, many ways, which is really investigative true crime, cold cases, murders, rapists, whatever. What we are referring to mainly is the dramaturgy approach, that it reveals the parts of the plot and information when you, as a filmmaker, need it to surprise and bring the audience forward, that you can apply that to the story like Wild Wild Country, or to a story of like people hiking in the mountains. It's a technique of really using all the fictional dramaturgy elements, twists, plot twists, to dose the information instead of dose the content and the different plots as the story progresses, instead of being very informational. So you can say, I know that this guy went from here to there, and you can say that right away, or you can say, we knew that he left the house, then he went there, and then at some point arrived there. That's the difference in the dramaturgy.
And I think it's shifting the emphasis from information to character. So they, just like in fiction, you have character development, and also the other element is it's present tense. So you're telling the story as it unfolded. You're reconstructing it so that it plays out as it was experienced by the characters, rather than giving all the information. It's funny when you're talking about this, because actually that's the way you tell a story anyway, whether it's true or not true. So the same things with fiction. And the boom in fiction series happened before the boom in nonfiction, because nonfiction is kind of trickier to do. In technique-wise, it's really complicated to get the same effect. But I think the series boom is quite natural. In fact, there's an Argentinian director who does fiction, actually, but he says that a series is like the novel and a feature is like a short story. There's a certain amount of truth in that, because with a novel, you can basically describe a world, a context, and you have much more space for character development. Whereas in a feature, you really it has to be honed down very clearly to a really kind of suggestive, simple story, or simple, not necessarily simple story, but single story.
This is very interesting, because it leads me to question how much prepared you have to be when pitching or preparing a docuseries, how much you have to know before you start to write a scenario, or if we can imagine that there is no scenario because we don't know what's going to happen.
There's a Spanish director who says that you have to sell the smoke to build the factory. And so it's about the only time in nonfiction where you can indulge in fiction with any but the intention is different. When you're writing and you do need to kind of have an idea of how the story is going to play out in 3 or 4 episodes, but you don't know everything. And so you frame it in a way, you try and imagine it as much as possible. And if you're good, when you've made the series later on, you come back to your original proposal and it's not that different. You don't know the ending, you don't know the meaning, but you know where to look for it. So how much work do you need to do? It's difficult to say. I mean, I'm amazed at here. It's amazing the amount of work. And people spend years and they're still in development. I don't think it's any different really from feature to documentary series or we kind of like call them non-fiction series simply in the early days, because documentary is this word that means so many different things to so many different people. It was kind of confusing. So we thought we'd break that up a little bit. But essentially, it's no different from the feature. Whatever the commissioning editors will accept, I mean, we'd like to say, we made a good one last time, just give us the money. But it doesn't work like that.
Yeah, I totally agree. Personally, when I make a series, independently if it's true crime or not, but if you want to play with dramaturgy to make a series, the more you know, the better. Because then you can control how you tell that more that you know. But it's also true that if you play well with the informations you know, then you go out, you shoot, you have more interviews, you find out a few more details or a few more accidental stories that you think, oh, that would fit there very well in where I was already imagining something like that. But most of the time you go back to your sort of original structure and you see that more or less you knew enough to imagine a structure that kind of resembles what you got at the end. Of course, when you make a series, the more you can control the story from the beginning, the better. One thing that I think is very different from the creative documentary in the more auteur way that we are used to think of is with series, you don't build the series in the edit for months and months and months until you find the film in the edit. I mean, if you do that, first you go bankrupt. And also the series, if you want to have it with this kind of like dramaturgy that keeps you a little bit hooked and a little bit interested, and you need to control it from the beginning. And also in the edit, you already know what you're going to edit. Then, of course, there is a creative part in the edit, but you are not looking for the film in the edit with all the material in boxes and the editor, like in a way, I'm sure that a lot of documentary filmmakers that are listening, that with the normal creative documentary process, many times you are like editing until you kind of find the film. That's very different.
Absolutely. No, I think that's very, very true. I mean, I think it's better even with, even in the most creative way, to have a clear direction at the beginning, even knowing, and this is the trick, it's quite kind of difficult. I noticed this in bringing young directors on in our own company and everything. You have to have this sort of mental flexibility that you have to really believe that that's going to be the direction, but you have to be completely open to it changing. And the other thing about, how fiction can sometimes overpower us is that you need to start, you're investigating, scripting, editing, filming, all at the same time, all the way through the process. So it's not like you in the fictional industrial model of, writing the script, filming it, and then editing it. That's a crazy way of making a documentary, I think.
So almost impossible for ADHD people, for example.
Yeah, I think so. Yes. Well, actually, no. I think they could be good at it. Actually, I mean, you need that kind of energy.
Yes.
You need to be you're basically in total chaos the whole time.
Great. Justin Webster is an Emmy-winning documentary director and producer with a continuing passion for crafting non-fiction narratives. He developed this passion first as a writer while working as a reporter for Independent in London in the early 90s, having graduated in classical literature from Cambridge University. Working with photographers as a freelance writer led to directing his first short documentaries. In 2004, his first feature documentary, the Verite film about a year inside FC Barcelona won several international awards. His films and series are either investigative, constructed through testimonies, archives, and recreations, or verite style following an unfolding story in the present. Justin believes that non-fiction, told with craft but without invention, can be as dramatic and creative as the best fiction, and often more revealing. As Stefano was talking about bankrupting, I have one question here. How easy or difficult it is to, compared to feature-length films, to manage funding and secure co-production partners for documentary series? Let's talk about Europe, for example.
Well, I think what's happened over the last 7-8 years, I mean, we made the first series in 2016, just when it was beginning. And I think there was then a boom of the platform seeing that this is something that worked. So the model went, the money, if you like, was with the platforms and still is, and they could fully fund, which was an extraordinary experience for us documentary filmmakers who've lived in co-production land, you know, spending a year and getting 12 different funders to be able to finance your feature. So the fully funding thing, that's still the same, although everything's always in flux. I think the boom is over and the model is changing. But that's basically where it is. Most of the money is still with the platforms, although the international co-production has always been there, and I think it's coming back. And I think that public television stations, the best ones, well, not the best ones, the fastest ones, BBC actually in Spain, where I live, they're beginning to do that. So young people are coming in and commissioning things for their own digital platforms, and that's quite exciting, because if you can get public broadcasters in simpler co-productions, that could be really great.
I wouldn't say that to finance a series is much different from financing a normal feature. It's, of course, with the platforms, there was like, let's say, like a specific and more special way to get them commissioned, which now is becoming again more open to platform plus a national broadcaster or different cluster of broadcasters, because between crisis, inflation, COVID, the budgets have gone down a little bit. Also, there was a lot of like overproduction during the COVID period. So also the platforms have in a way overproduced a bit. The public broadcasters where I have more experience with, they are a little bit slower in commissioning series because they still work with a more slot system. But of course, first of all, there's always been some, like history series, travel series, but that's more like the sort of like traditional documentary style anyways. But in terms of structures of financing, it's quite similar to that of a feature. The difference is that you need to put more effort in preparing the package to pitch it to the broadcasters, and it's probably slightly more difficult in the public TV realm to convince them to put it in the programming. But that depends on the story, And then it's the same, it's public funding where it's possible for development and production, major slice of the cake from a public broadcaster or platform plus a broadcaster, a private platform plus a public broadcaster, dividing the rights in very many weird ways. And then maybe some EU money or some government money to kind of close production. There is a whole lot of different tax credits law that apply now in many countries, also for like Netflix series that, like they give you 20% of what Netflix is actually spending in the country, then the government will give you another 20%. So there is many ways to do this all together. It's, I would say, the same work of financing a 90 minutes in a way. The difference is that it's bigger work, it's bigger budgets. The nice part, I would say, as a producer is that if you finance a series, then you have a little bit more time in a way that your company is focused on that work. But also that is changing. I mean, the deadlines now for series, if you get it, you have to deliver it much faster than maybe like 2 years ago.
Everything getting faster?
Yeah, I think it has done. Yes, I think it's been, because I think quite a lot of the executives in the platforms have recently been coming from other non-documentary areas. And so their idea of, the delivery in 6 months, where in documentary terms, that's crazy. And so I think, yes, and that's tended towards producing kind of reality TV type documentaries. And that's contaminated our world a little bit, because documentary filmmaking is heavily based, somebody said it today, heavily based on trust. And now it's like you have production companies who charge in and try and sign people's life rights immediately, and it can get a bit ugly and a bit over commercial for our documentary background. This slow making of we hope really really good stuff.
Yeah, and getting very close to our characters and spending some part of our lives with them. This is really dangerous.
Exactly.
What is a difference between conditions in Europe and North America? Can you say?
Gosh, do you know, Stefano? I mean, we do deal with North America, actually Latin America a lot. I think the conditions are that this boom in non-fiction, this boom in documentary series is kind of still going a bit. I mean, the budgets have come down, but the boom in kind of people wanting it. I mean, we're dealing with a studio that's just set up in Miami, part of one of the big broadcasters. And it's like people still think there's lots of money in it. And that can be really bad, actually. I mean, because if it's not really money that's attuned to documentary filmmaking, and so it ends up being much more of a reality TV. So I think the danger in the States is there's this, as Stefano was saying, the overproduction has kind of contaminated things. So maybe this the end of this boom will actually be good for us. Things will start falling into place. The one great thing about it, the most important, is that the audience has expanded enormously. So it used to be like, you say documentary to your teenage child, and they go, what, that thing that you put on at 2 a.m. on the second channel, and it's very educational and nobody wants to watch.
Or do you want me to watch something about animals in Africa?
Exactly. That's right. That's exactly right. So now it's like, oh, so you mean the true crime documentary I saw on Netflix last night, which isn't ideal, but actually it is amazing also how many great documentaries, great feature documentaries. I think sort of 3 of the 5 nominated for the Oscars, great films this year, by the way, are on major platforms. So it's not like they're not doing good stuff and distributing good quality work, and that gets into the system. So occasionally you do get your teenage child saying, I saw this really good thing the other night, and they didn't even know it's a documentary, but they really enjoyed it.
I want to add one thing, though, that I totally agree, but for the filmmakers, it's very important to remember that the audiences become more sophisticated too. So they expect more dramaturgy, more quality, more work with the story, more access, because this beautiful series, and there are many, and features, they have really, really good quality. So then for us as filmmakers, we always have to keep in mind that the audience that is watching those will watch our stuff next. And so our stuff has to match that quality if we want to make it good.
The bar has been raised in many respects, yeah.
Stefano Strocchi is a Berlin-based independent author and documentary producer. He began working on international co-productions in 2001 at Stefilm International, contributing to documentary projects and series for National Geographic channels, PBS, ZDF Arte, and Discovery Channel Europe. In 2008, he founded his first production company in Italy, where he produced Almost Married, the cross-media series From Zero Stories from Earthquake Tent Camps, in co-production with Al Jazeera English, and Return to L'Aquila, in co-production with Al Jazeera English as well. In 2013, he wrote and directed the feature documentary La Politica. Let's delve into the screenwriting for a moment. When it comes to series, I imagine that the research and development are the key. So how should one prepare individual episodes and develop the whole concept in general?
I am a really sucker for writing, not so much the treatments like long treatments, but I'm really a sucker for structure, lots of structure, lots of, even before you shoot, you need to to do a lot of work of like structuring how you shoot it, because otherwise the risk to shoot too much stuff or to shoot stuff that then, instead of, you already have to do this work then in the edit to kill some of the darlings. But if you overproduce the darlings, you're screwed. So, and also you lose track of your purpose as a series. I mean, the nice thing that I like of the series is that because you have episodes, because you know where you want to go with the series, it's more structured from the beginning. Just because you have to build the episodes, even if they're not a crime series, so you don't need cliffhangers, but of course you still want people to watch episode 1, but then also episode 2 and episode 3. You have to have a much clearer idea of what is the content and how is the content distributed in the different episodes, so that they are all entertaining, that they all have like interesting, intimate moments, that they all have, ups and downs, that they have maybe a beautiful cathartic moment, a revelation moment. So that work is the writing work. You cannot do it afterwards. And also because in many of these series, you're filming a lot of, let's say, reenacted materials, which doesn't mean fiction. It means that you can reenact in many different ways. You can also just go in the street and film things, but it's much better if you know, okay, I need the lady putting the washed clothes on the balcony for that scene where my protagonist is talking about the fact that he has never had a normal life, and I want to counterbalance it with like images of people doing very normal things. That kind of stuff is much better to know before you go. And that stuff comes from writing and rewriting and reading it again. And that writing comes from knowing as much as possible about your story.
Yes, I totally agree. I mean, the more writing and the more that you do beforehand, but it's really like training your imagination, because there's a huge difference, massive difference between fiction and non-fiction in this respect. And you should never think that the script that you're writing is a script in that sense. It's actually kind of a projection. But the more you research, the more you write, the more you refine like your ideas, more you kind of exercise your imagination, and it's kind of like a exercising your body in a gym. You're kind of, so that when you go and shoot, you end up shooting and building a lot of the pieces that you've got, but you come back inevitably with things that are different, because you've only imagined it, you haven't actually done it yet. So that's why I say that in fact, when we edit, as soon as the first shoot, we start editing. And in order to do that, you have to have an idea of the structure. I completely agree. If the structure, in a way, is the most important thing you need, because you don't know the meaning. You don't know how, if they're any good, you don't know how the story ends. You don't know how the characters are going to develop. What you know is that if they go along this route, there's going to be change, and then you speculate. So the only danger is when we talk about screenwriting, I couldn't emphasize this too much, is that we've got to be really, really careful about fiction, because the film industry is totally, totally dominated by fiction, and non-fiction is a completely different art. And so it has a completely different process. So the script writing is really training your imagination. It's not actually writing a script in that sense.
I wanted to ask you if you can imagine that one could go with her or his camera into a field. Let's say there is some extreme situation, you don't have the time to prepare for that, and you simply film and film and film. So in your opinion, can this be one day a good series if there is no preparation at all?
Frankly, I doubt it. No, I don't. I think because if it's, I mean, it could be interesting. It could be an interesting thing. Maybe you could turn it, and maybe be in parts, in episodes. But you need to have a character, and you need to have a direction. I mean, nothing's impossible. It's always difficult to give, categorical answers. But generally, no. That would be a different kind of thing. It could be very valuable, but it wouldn't be the same thing.
Yeah, I think the same. I mean, the thing is, when you prepare, it's like you're preparing the path of the series and the path of the story as well, and the breaks if there is episodes that. So it's like you're imagining the stations of your protagonist. Really imagine if it's the stations that are along the way. And then when you're filming, you're in your head, you're looking for those stations or similar moments to those stations. So if you don't have that, of course, you can have a lot of material. But if you would then need to organize it afterwards, I bet you have to go back and shoot more than once you've organized it, because then you will have a structure. Say, I'm missing this station, I'm missing this part, I'm missing this part. If you don't have it in your head in such a long, maybe 4 or 6 episodes dramaturgy, and I don't think you can do it in a way.
But there's a danger on the other side too. You've imagined, you've worked very hard on this projection, this text you've got in your head and your imagination, and then you force it onto the story. So in other words, you become too inflexible and rigid. And if something happens that is obviously important for the story you're trying to tell, but you haven't imagined it before, you can't black it out. You have to be responsive. So that's where it comes in. We have another saying in our production company, which is there's a quote by F. Scott Fitzgerald, which is the definition of high intelligence is the ability to hold two opposing ideas in your head at the same time and maintain the ability to function. And the two ideas you have to have is that you have a script and there is no script. So you have to be responsive to the possibilities. So it's not an idea of it being, contained. You are, wedded to this idea, which is simply a projection at the beginning.
How do you perceive the potential of combining a feature film with expanding the subject matter into a miniseries? Do you see it as a beneficial addition and creative way to use the extra material we have, or do you have other insights based on your experience?
Like if you can go from a 90 minutes with all the rest of the material into a miniseries.
Yes.
I mean, ideally you could. I would say it's much easier to have a series and then kind of create a 90 minutes out of the series, because
we've done that on 2 occasions actually.
Me too.
Exactly.
Which way?
From a series to a 90.
Yeah, in other words, you do quite
almost planning it in advance sometimes. In fact, in one of the contracts we had with a 6-part series, we had to have a 90-minute, and it wasn't. It's a different thing. It would be different if you were to it would be very, very different if you were to plan a 90 and then try and turn it into a series. Although I can think of one film I did, we filmed so much and we left out so much. We killed so many darlings that you were thinking, God, it would have been wonderful to have done a 3 or 4 part series. But
one thing I want to say though, you don't make a series because there is a lot of material, because there is a long story. You can make a series with a very, very short story. It's all about dramaturgy. We can make a 5-part series of him getting out of his hotel and coming here for this podcast.
Okay,
if you
I would
want
like
to
see
you know
that.
What I mean?
We were talking about that last night, and he's quite right. It's like, we feel that very much. It's like sometimes given a kind of really difficult, seemingly difficult assignment like that, the walk from a hotel to the French Institute, but then. And this is an idea that comes into focus more and more, I find, is that people looking for brilliant ideas, and the brilliant ideas don't really exist. What it's all about the development. So if you were to take a sort of okay idea and really develop it well, that could be a great film or series. And what seems like a brilliant idea without the right development will stay just like that, a sort of a brilliant idea without any great film or series after it.
It happens sometimes that people come with stories, filmmakers come with stories saying, I thought this should be a series because the story is really complicated. And it's not about that. You can make a really fantastic 90 minutes or 52 minutes with a very complicated story. It's really about how you're telling the story that then there is reasons for having a series that the development is over many, many years and many, many plot twists, or there can be reasons that are not so connected to how much material you have or how big is the story. It's also a choice of a dramaturgical approach that makes you to the series, I would say.
Sure.
I think there is a lot in this. I give you an example. Justin gets out of his hotel at 9:30 to go to the French Institute, meet Ivana for the podcast that he has to do. He walks through 3 or 4 streets, he crosses the road, sees a tramway going by, arrives to the French Institute, sits there because he has the interview with you. That would be like the normal narrative that we have in a documentary. The other way would be Justin looks at the watch, it's 9:25, and gets out of the door of his hotel. He looks around, he's in Prague. He arrives to the first street and tries to cross, but a beautiful tramway from Prague full of people is looking at him, and he feels a bit awkward, but he cannot cross. He waits. Then the tramway finally gets out of the way. He crosses, look at the watch in the street. Here there is a lot of watches in the street, and it's 9:28. His face is a bit puzzled. He might be late, we don't know. Then he finally arrives in front of a building with flags of French and Czech flags, and he looks around and then he walks in. He looks around again because there is no sign of where he has to go. He asks the guard there, and they point him downstairs. He arrives downstairs where there is a lady sitting on a yellow chair with a lot of microphones and some coffee, and he sits and says, "Hello, I am Justin, and I'm here for my interview."
You missed out something, because as he was walking along the street, just before he got into the French Institute, you cut back to his hotel room, and there's a telephone he's left behind, and it's ringing. And it rings, and it rings, and it rings. It cuts out, and you go back to him coming down and sitting down, and you cut back, and it's ringing again. And then the podcast starts.
Yeah, I've got one more episode. Justin is coming out of his hotel, and he meets a person who is so obviously close to somebody he knows from his childhood, and his fantasy goes on. And throughout all the way to the French Institute, you're following the story from his childhood.
Absolutely.
Well,
there we
not?
go. Exactly. And by the time he gets to sit down at the podcast, you're going, okay, this guy's really weird, and I haven't figured him out yet, which is character development. And you're thinking, so what's going to happen next? Which is the other motive of, the force of narrative. What's going to happen next? And character development are the two things. Yeah. So yes.
What you see is that in the first way I told you before, all the informations were given right away. You knew from the beginning that he was coming here. In the other version, you don't know until he arrives. And that's just the difference in when you make it more like dramaturgically interesting.
Cool. We just made it. So we definitely need to film this one.
Yeah.
It's great film.
We'll be back.
Okay, my last question has something to do with magic. If you could perform magic and had the power to arrange one thing that would assist documentary filmmakers in Europe in producing docuseries, what would that be?
I would pass a law, European-wide law, which would force all public broadcasters to team up with a commercial platform, just one platform, one broadcaster, 10 times a year, and produce documentary series.
And Stefano?
No, I think that's probably one of the most needed things. I mean, a more practical thing is that in general in documentary, the space that is more difficult to finance is the development. So of course, I mean, if there was more development funding in general, especially then, let's say in Eastern European countries, the development is even more problematic. And the only funds that are sometimes accessible are the EU, Creative Europe, which it's fantastic, but it's probably not enough. So I would say more development money would also help. But definitely having public broadcasters and streamers teaming up would help both. There is mission in public broadcasting that is deeper than, in a way, the entertainment of the platforms. And we're forgetting that. And I think that was like a really, really important thing that, it's information entertainment and make you think. And public broadcasters still should do that. But it should entertain enough that people don't just run away to the platforms.
Thank you. Thank you for these ideas. Thank you for all your work and for being on EastDoc Platform 2024. Thank you very much for the interview.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you very much, Ivona.
Thank you.
And now we win the prize for the best podcast.
Yes, that's right.
So this is gonna be the series, right? Like it's like 5 episodes on how to do series. And I can listen to myself in the car all the way back to Berlin.